I'm delighted to be moderating this session, looking forward to the post-COVID-19 world and kind of the shape of the accountancy and auditing profession. This is the opportunity for us to really dive into those questions. If I can start with, how do you see businesses changing to address their client needs? Let's start with Alan. What do you think?
The pandemic took wings and firms started working remotely. The whole concept of client service doesn't change. The concept of probably better empathy toward our client and the issues they're facing has certainly been very, very important in today's environment. Probably always should have been to begin with, to tell you the truth. But the concept is really about connection, is really keeping that connection basically planned. Intentional connection is what we call it at Accountability Plus. In other words, not just be ad hoc, not just email, but really be intentionally connected to your client so that they know where things are and you know where things are at the client. I think it's very important to make that connection very intentional.
That's a really good opportunity to think about your messaging with a client, making sure you're checking in and, really focusing on like good client engagement.
To add on to what Alan said, I think clients right now are really focused on how do they get through the current situation, right? And so it's being respectful of what they're going through on a current and ongoing basis, and then looking for ways to actually help them through that effort. So in addition to staying connected, it's looking to understand their challenges and help them drive through that and address, what's going on with the current COVID-19 situation.
And how about you, Jonathan? What do you think?
We've been trying for years to make things really easy for clients, but when you can't go to their client site, which a lot of times they just like, or they like to come to us, a lot of the excuses of not doing things maybe remotely or doing things like this have just gone away. And so being able to anticipate client needs in a virtual world has been a huge change for us, which has been welcome. We've used Alan before to help us get there, and all the excuses are gone. And so I think just being able to read your client needs in a virtual world has been a big change, especially this time of year for accounting firms, at least, or maybe not in May, but certainly in March and April. That was a big switch for most of our professionals.
Did you notice any patterns? Like, were most clients interested in kind of engaging with you in the same way, or were there lots of very individual preferences?
As soon as the IRS here in the U.S. said you don't have to pay your taxes on April 15th, they wanted to interact with us very differently, and most of it was a combination of predicting the future, which we can do to a certain degree. If you have 5 years of data in a MindBridge world, perhaps we can use projections. But a lot of it was figuring out and navigating constantly changing legislation for financial assistance. And that's still something we're wrestling with. I would imagine every CPA now knows PPP really well, or at least well enough to know that they don't want much to do with it. And it's been all the years where we've said that CPAs have the moniker of the trusted advisor, I think have really come full circle and have shown that at least our clients are really desperate for CPA help. And one of the parts that, and I'll shut up in a second, but one of the parts that we're terrible at is really charging for our services. And especially now when there is a bit of a cash crunch and we see it, still charging what you are, but I think articulating value for the various needs that our clients have is something that we're really trying to get across to our folks. Let's be sensitive and let's make sure that we're meeting the needs and keeping that relationship strong, but at the same time, let's make absolutely sure that we're billing for what we're doing because there is real value there. And if you can't articulate that, it's really hard to bill it.
A lot of the things you guys have been talking about is how you interact with how people interact with clients, but what impact do you think COVID-19 is going to have on kind of the internal working practices of the industry? What change do you think will be there? Chris, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. First off, it's forcing people into technologies like this and learning and using virtual work environments. And I think back to a few years ago. In the company that I worked for in the past, had a formal work from home structure for a number of their employees, and then they realized it wasn't efficient and they brought everyone back to the office. And other companies like Yahoo had a well-publicized situation that was very similar. But I think it was a situation where companies and people weren't forced to be comfortable with the technology and forced to work in this environment beyond, your kind of weather events and other type of one-off, few days type work from home structures. So here you're basically forced for 2+ months in a lot of situations to make it work. And so you have to get beyond just keeping the lights on and managing the day-to-day close or managing through your day-to-day processes, but figuring out how to make longer term efforts and projects where you're typically used to sitting around a table, working with people, figuring out how to make that work. And so I think companies will be re-questioning, does this virtual work structure take a bigger presence in our, in our work environment? And they start to relook at real estate footprints and those types of things. I think the other aspect is going to be, companies relooking at outsourcing arrangements and other types of structures where they've shifted work to third parties and making sure that they have good, solid business continuity planning. I think this has really exposed some gaps in, contractual language and other areas with outsourcing partners that have created some challenges in terms of, getting through some of the day-to-day work for accounting and finance organizations.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things to learn from kind of people's business continuity plans being put into action, and that's definitely how you identify the gaps, right? So, Alan, what do you think?
It's an interesting dynamic, and I think back to as the world changed. I reflect back on many years ago when accounting firms decided they're going to, quote, embrace technology, and their plan of embracing technology resulted in using technology to replicate the way they did things in a paper-based world, all right? So they never really took advantage of the technology. So then when firms were forced into this remote environment, what they did is they were using technology that was still replicating the paper-based world, and then they tried to replicate all of their traditional execution of the work with their clients, whether it be audit or tax, in the way they executed the work for the most part when they were doing it from the office or at the client. And so what happened was they never took the time to really rethink what needed to happen. It's like, what do the people really need to accomplish their objective? Now, they were put into a fire drill to get it done really fast, so they didn't really have the time. But now is absolutely the time to take a deep breath and say, okay, and it's kind of like what Amy said in her earlier presentation, what worked, what didn't work, and what should we do going forward? Because that's exactly right, because this train has left the station, and this remote world of the way we deliver our services is not going to stop. But the metrics that we use today to measure success is that great old thing called the chargeable hour. That's not a winning metric even today, but it's certainly not a winning metric in the remote world. It's all about deliverables and serving the client, in my view.
Definitely sense that there's going to have to be kind of a root and branch analysis of all of those working practices, and we're going to maybe start from scratch, right? Because what works in person doesn't necessarily work virtually, and this is a really good time to do that. What do you think, Jonathan?
I really appreciate what Alan said. I mean, Amy talked a little bit about robotics and automation. That, of course, is a big part of 2020, even more so now, as we have maybe fewer people or hiring freezes and still need a lot of work done. Automation is one of those areas where people have a pain and then they just want it to be automated away. But I think Alan's point really can't be overstated enough, where you really have an opportunity there to say, why do we do this in the first place? And just because we can automate it doesn't mean that we should. And we have an example that we just rolled out about a month and a half ago. We had done some interviews, just some normal process interviews with a couple of our departments, and there was 9 people that were printing reports to PDF every week and sending them out to a bunch of our management team. And it was just an incomplete, it was an enormous effort for them to do this. And they're like, can we automate this? And we said, yes, we totally can. And they said, how fast can you do it? And I said, as fast as you can tell me why we are sending these things out every week to these people. And that creates a much different conversation. And I think COVID is giving us these little speed bumps to say, all right, there's a lot of energy around things like innovation, and I love Alan's quote on embracing technology. But if you're just doing it in a hurry, or you're just doing it to replace the current state, I think we're missing the real opportunity to truly do something that really gives that value to it, as opposed to just wasting effort and energy.
It's funny, you talk about printing things. My partner's an auditor as well, and there's been a lot of upset about the fact people can't print the accounts to do the final review. So, I think some people it's going to take different people different amounts of time, right, to adjust to this new digital world. So, if we reflect on kind of the industry today, what industry issues do you think should have a renewed focus post COVID-19? So can we start with you, Jonathan?
I think the renewed focus, honestly, there has been so much, the word commoditized was becoming very used in the audit and tax world for the past few years, in terms of, audits are going to be, automated away, or we're going to use AI to replace them. And I certainly think we'll be using AI, and continuous audit will come into play at some point. That said, with the pandemic being one thing and the economic impact being another, I really do think that in terms of a renewed focus, I think the audit is going to have a renaissance on some level, where going concern is a true concern now. I think being able to account for government assistance, I think disclosing impact, really addressing uncertainties. I think the risks of management's incentives are really going to be needing a lot more scrutiny. Budgeting a year in advance right now is really hard to do. We just had our budgeting season for our firm, and I mean, I'd be shocked if anything we put on paper 2 months ago is close to accurate. And I think that's the role that auditors play. And using tools like MindBridge is a wonderful one, but the auditor judgment is going to be, I think, one of the things that we really need to hone in. And I hope that throughout all this, with people being nervous and whatever is going to happen in the future, being a little uncertain, I hope that we don't lose the ability to really take the time to think and scrutinize the risks of each client, because people are going to be relying on these audit reports, I would say next year's audit reports, a lot more so than maybe they have in the prior years. Economic uncertainty always does that. And so for all the critique of commoditization of these core services, I think we're about to see a real big benefit to making sure that we keep our skills up to snuff.
At MindBridge, you've been talking about going concern quite a bit, actually, and how you can use data to reach a more accurate assessment of that. So I definitely think that's something people should be thinking about. What do you think, Chris?
If I think about it from an industry perspective, I look at tools like MindBridge and other technologies that are out there, and the comment that Jonathan mentioned about the importance of risk assessment really resonates. And I think companies are going to be looking for ways to leverage data and leverage the capabilities of AI to really better manage their risk profiles and have those quicker insights into what's going to be happening, based on historical, and then leveraging that outside data and economic data that you can enrich your internal environment with to be able to drive better and more relevant insights. So I see that as a real outcome of the current environment.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on a couple concepts, when I look at the current environment, I think that this current environment has created a much stronger platform for companies and firms to take better advantages of good tools that are out there like MindBridge and things of that nature, because what they tried to do, most of the firms tried to do when they were looking at a tool like MindBridge, for example, they would try to use MindBridge to replicate the current state. And as opposed to thinking about what MindBridge can do to be used in place of something that's being done in the current state. And now with the insights and the analytics that can come from something like MindBridge, this environment from a risk assessment standpoint that window is much tighter, and we need to look at risks on a much more concurrent basis, and using powerful tools like something like a MindBridge to kind of help keep track of all of that is really a helpful tool, because many of the clients on January 15th you wouldn't have thought for one moment about the word going concern.
Yeah.
On February 15th, you were starting to scratch your head. On March 15th, you're saying, oh my gosh, we got to really look at this. And so as fast as the world changes, human individuals cannot digest data at that rapid enough pace to understand it. That's why you need tools that are out there, such as MindBridge, to kind of help you much more rapidly digest that data.
And actually, one of the things that I think about quite a lot is continuous audit. If the risk landscape is changing quite, rapidly, and, there's more of a need for continuous audit, right? Because, there's things are moving faster. And so being able to monitor the data on a more frequent basis and detect those changes is a better way to get to grips with what's going on in a company. Platforms like MindBridge can really help support that, right? Because they're designed to deal with ingesting that data, at a higher frequency, rerunning analysis, and, showing you differences. How interested or how close do you think people are to looking at a continuous audit? Do any of you have any views on that?
Rachel, if I can jump in real quick and just take an alternate spin and do the political thing where I'm not going to answer the question that you asked.
That's all right.
I'm not going to make it sound like I am. I think the other side of continuous audit, which I do think, depending how we use that phrase, can mean a lot of different things. We're doing it in the sense of quarterly audits, of course, for public companies, and maybe doing some interim testing. But on the internal side, maybe we're doing a little bit of continuous auditing. But I'm hoping the standards almost require, as opposed to the annual in the future. That said, the other side of being able to look at data in more real time. I think one of the things that the COVID-19 crisis exposed, at least in firms, is this concentration of cash crunch, where we get so much of our revenue in March and April. And when you unplug a workforce to not only have to find ways to work remotely, but really find different ways to get in touch with their clients and have that same sense of urgency, and it really starts to show, oh my goodness, we're not going to get that same cash inflow that we usually have, and we don't typically run on big cash cushions. I think a continuous auditing, the other side of that is continuous billing for services.
Right.
And there's something to that where it makes a lot more sense to not have to have an annual engagement that essentially you bill for the past 3-4 weeks all at one hit. But so not only do I think it's much more valuable for the client and for the public, I think on the firm side, at least, it's a lot safer of a business model to have the constant inflow as opposed to the one-time or at least annual engagement billing side.
That makes a lot of sense. Chris and Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chime in, and I think it's an interesting dynamic with Jonathan being on the firm side and maybe me being on the industry internal side. I see a tool like MindBridge being something that companies should be looking to embed into their basically into their finance processes to pre-audit or do all of those compliance checks even before anything goes to the internal auditors, let alone the external auditors. And those types of tools can be early warning systems to what's happening within the finances, identifying instances of potential fraud, unusual transactions that can help in effect reduce that both internal compliance and external audit costs as a cost of doing business, in addition to making the audit process in general more smooth and streamlined.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. One is, it's like, first of all, I think the whole concept of continuous monitoring, continuous assurance has a very distinct place in both industry and in public accounting on a go-forward basis. Should always have been the case. When I have spoken around the country over the years, when I speak to industry CFOs, I tend to always ask the question, how many of your companies use GAAP financial statements to make business decisions? And I've had one CFO in the entirety of my career raise their hand saying that they use GAAP to make business decisions. And they're all building systems around the financial reporting system to help them make business decisions. And then you think about the audit process. The audit process is upside down. We start with the balance, and the balance is history. when people ask me what I do for a career, I say accountants are financial statement historians, and what auditors do is we validate history. That's all after the fact. And what we need to be able to do is make sure that we've got systems in place from inside an organization and an external organization to really get a good handle on the data. Until a CPA firm turns their audit upside down and make their audits data driven, because they can't do continuous auditing and use tools that are influenced by data like MindBridge until they understand the data. CPA firms understand the balance, and if I go pick 7 items in that balance and say they're get confirmed as correct, you say the whole balance is correct. So the whole future is continuous. The historical financial statement, in my view, has a shelf life because people want continuous assurance. And they're relying on other systems for continuous assurance today. And the final stamp of approval is the historical financial statement, but our real value on the CPA public accounting side of the profession is being able to have a very meaningful place in that real-time assurance continuum. And we can, but we have to understand the data. That's why tools that really analyze data well will do the detail work and leave the interpretation to the CPA, whether they be an industry or public practice.
I totally agree. And the thing is as an auditor, you get access to so much data, right? Like so many different kinds of data sets, and you can build up almost a unique view of a business sometimes because, you can have lots of different people in the finance function looking at their own view of the world, but actually as an auditor you bring all that together, and I think that's quite unique. And being able to bring data analytics to that and machine learning and really derive value from that really excites me. So we've got one question left. What one piece of advice do you have for firms on business development and innovation at this time?
Yeah, I think looking at it from a consulting perspective, what's happening in the world is just going to accelerate companies' need for transformation and relooking at processes, technology, organizational structure, and how do they react and adjust to the new normal. So, I think talking with clients about what's happening in their businesses, understanding how they've been impacted by COVID-19, and then leveraging transformation services as an opportunity to drive business from that end. I only see that accelerating coming out of this once companies can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think what this COVID-19 pandemic did is it pushed a lot of CPA firm, quote, fence sitters off the fence. And some of those real laggards, they threw them over the fence to really start working with what this future model should be like. You've got firms that are out there in the leading edge, such as Jonathan's firm at Cherry Beckert. They've been always looking for. There's a lot of firms that were forced into this situation where they really didn't want to change, and they kind of wanted to take a wait and see attitude, and they had no choice when this came about. So the real key is to continue to move forward and don't get back on the fence. Stay off the fence, move forward, and learn from what worked, change what didn't, and continue to make your firm progressively moving forward. And that would be a huge win for all of the firms. The train's left the station. Don't go back to the station.
Thanks, Alan. Jonathan, really interested to hear what you think. What advice would you give on business development and innovation?
Well, now I can't just say ditto. I got to come up with an original thought. Although I do agree with Chris and Alan. For me, it is don't waste this opportunity. I just, as I said earlier, there's a lot of interest right now in doing something new, whether it's because like Alan's saying where they're getting forced to, or just because they're genuinely, wanting it. For me, more specifically than that, though, is many accounting firms have at least been aware of paperless, if not paperless, for years and years now. But I think the next stage of this, if they haven't started down this path, is the concept of being truly digital. And by that, I mean, we're gathering all sorts of data from our clients, whether it's the GL, which, as we heard Ellie say, is 5-10% of all the data we're actually looking at least in the audit world. There's a lot more that perhaps isn't being studied as much. And so knowing who your clients are, being able to tie your financial statements to the risks, and being able to maybe even look at the aggregate level across all clients, I think is one of the big opportunities for us to truly know the data. As Alan said earlier, we don't really know how to read the data. We know how to look at it maybe for one engagement, but knowing who our clients are is going to be the next big thing. And I think CPAs, by and large, we look at one client at a time instead of our entire client base altogether.
I was just going to add in, I think you leverage the benefits of the cloud on Jonathan's comments and look at the data across the client base, across industries, and bringing in external data to really gain insights into what's happening on any one particular client. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting way to maybe be able to provide benchmarking services as well, because you'll be able to see what's going on in an industry and really get a sense of that. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their contributions today. I definitely think I've learned something, and I hope our audience have too.